This is Duke University.
I welcome you to the 2013 edition of the Ferguson Family Distinguished Lectureship on Environment and Society for the Nicholas School of the Environment. The purpose of the lecture series is to bring some of the world's most influential environmental thinkers and doers to our university to speak on environmental issues of great social importance. The subject of our lecture series, Environment and Society, was chosen in recognition of the fact that the study of the environment goes well beyond the quote-unquote environment, if you will. The well-being of our environment directly impacts our health and well-being, physical health, economic health, spiritual health. It is the very thread that connects up the fabric of our lives and the fabric of society. It sustains and nurtures us. We hope that these lectures will serve as a catalyst to inspire and engage students and faculty from all areas of the arts, sciences, and humanities towards a common goal of forging a more sustainable future for everyone. The series is endowed through the generous support and far-sighted vision of Julia and Ritson Ferguson and their family. Gifts like these are a large part of what makes our institution great and makes it possible for us to have lectures like this, and we are grateful for their support for this lecture and for making it possible for us to hear the lecture tonight. Previous speakers in our series have included Vice President Al Gore, energy and visionary Amory Lovins, author and environmental luminary Lester Brown, EPA Administrator Lisa Jackson, and human rights activist John Prendergast. Tonight, we add another luminary to this list, renowned conservation scientist Ullas Karanth. With more than 130 scientific papers and 7 books to his credit, Dr. Karanth is one of the Earth's most respected and widely cited experts on predator-prey ecology. He has worked for more than 27 years to save India's endangered Bengal tigers from extinction, and he is has been honored by the Sierra Club, the World Wildlife Fund, and the President of India, among others, for his groundbreaking work. I've had an opportunity to spend some time with Ullas in a rather unique and interesting context, and to get to see a very interesting and unique part of him. Some years ago, I was in India, and I visited with him, and he took me to the Nagarholi, thank you, wildlife sanctuary. I've been working on this for years. And I had an opportunity to go with him and his daughter, Krithi. Many of us know Krithi. She is a graduate of the Nicholas School and doing very, very well. We are proud of her, not nearly as proud as I think as Ullas is of Krithi, but she's a remarkable individual. And also with Ullas's granddaughter, Kaya. And he's a phenomenal scientist and a committed conservationist, but he's also quite a grandfather. And it was just really wonderful to me to see him playing with his granddaughter and talking baby talk to her and everything. And it's quite an amazing part of his personality and a wonderful part of his person. We are deeply honored that Dr. Karanth could take time from his pressing duties to join us tonight and deliver the 2013 Ferguson Family Lecture, Rediscovering Recovering Nature in Emerging India, the Tiger as a Case Study. I have asked our own beloved Norm Christensen, research professor and founding dean of the Nicholas School, to introduce Dr. Karanth tonight and put his legendary career and accomplishments into perspective. Norm.
Thank you, Bill. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to introduce Dr. Karanth. Ullas Karanth's path to his current vocation was anything but direct. He is the son of one of India's most distinguished writers, who, it also happens, had a great interest in the environment, which he obviously passed down to his son. As a boy, Ullas was fascinated with research and fieldwork, particularly that dealing with declining populations of tigers. But somehow, in that process, got redirected and ended up doing his undergraduate work in mechanical engineering. Pursuing that briefly, he then decided to return to at least a somewhat more natural setting. And for 8 years, he was a farmer in his native state of Karnataka. There he worked, we were talking today, he told me that he grew tobacco, and that in India that's a crop that requires only 3 years, or 3 months out of a year, and that he had then the remaining 9 months to spend on what was quickly becoming his passion, his interest in the flora and fauna of the region where he grew up. And in that farming situation, he became also very much aware of the impacts, growing impacts of land use in that region, particularly on the natural fauna and particularly on populations of tigers. You could say he was an amateur, I guess, naturalist at that time, but his work was anything but amateur. He got involved with and made connections with folks at the Smithsonian. One thing leading to the next, ended up in a position working at the National Zoo and its conservation and management program in Washington, D.C. He then, in 1988, obtained his master's degree in wildlife ecology from the University of Florida, working with Mel Sundquist, who would go on to be an important mentor for him as he did doctoral work in India at Mangalore University. In the 2 decades since that time, he has worked extensively on the ecology of tigers and other large mammals. He's pioneered the use of radio telemetry, camera trapping techniques in India, and developed statistical tools for robust estimates of animal population sizes. He's well known among conservation biologists for his many scholarly papers, but he's equally well known by the Indian public and many here in this country for his several books and important popular articles. His accomplishments in his position as senior conservation scientist with the Wildlife Conservation Society have been widely recognized with awards that include the Sierra Club's Earth Care Award, the J. Paul Getty Award for Conservation Leadership. This past year, he was recognized with one of India's most prestigious civilian honors, the Padma Shri Award, awarded for his contributions to wildlife conservation and environmental protection. Ullas, it's wonderful to have you here. We're looking forward to your talk. I hope you'll join me in welcoming Dr. Karanth to the podium.
It's a pleasure for me to be here in Raleigh-Durham and in the Duke campus. I have deep connections going back. In 1994, I was invited by John Terborg to talk to the students here, and ever since then I've been coming back like a bad penny, but it's been a pleasurable experience. But my original Duke connection was Professor Karel van Schaik, with whom I spent 2 weeks wandering in the forests of Sumatra. So it's nice to be here, and in the audience there are people I respect hugely who have contributed both to ecology and statistics immensely. I can't name them all, there are so many. I'm going to talk basically why conservation is science, partly, and partly it's not science at all, it's politics. So I'm trying to mesh the two and talk about using the tiger as a case study, how in the real world we can and we will rescue what are perceived largely as basket cases. So tiger is one such species. In 1993, I was in the middle of my tiger studies. The Time magazine reporter, Eugene Linden, came, spent 4 days in the forest, and said, tigers are doomed. I said, no, Eugene, tigers will come back. The big time they will come back. And he did a cover story in Time saying, doomed, predicting the extinction of the tiger in the year 2000. BBC predicted the extinction of the tiger in the year 2000, in 1993. And these death warrants are constantly being issued, but the tiger has managed to survive. So to me, it is how you do it, what you do now, and it's not just projecting the current scenario into the future and say everything is doomed. So to me, conservation is about being optimistic, but rationally optimistic. So so I'm going to basically weave in my personal life with a little bit of the story, a little bit of the science, and a little bit of the politics. Now, I'm going to primarily talk about southwestern India, the state of Karnataka, the Western Ghats, which are a global biodiversity hotspot, and the struggle to recover tigers there. And often, people think it's about recovering tigers, one species. No, you can have any number of tigers. All they need is a room this size and 5 kilograms of meat a day. It's about what does the tiger represent in this context. These, if you look at the distribution of the tiger, at one time, it occupied about 30 of present-day countries. Today, its range in the last 200 years has shrunk by 93%. So that's a half empty, you said if 93% is gone, the species is doomed. The way I look at it is there's still 1 million square kilometers of tiger habitat left. And if we all pack it with tigers and manage it well, we can have 50,000 tigers. So there are different ways of looking at the same issue. This is a map that shows the current distribution of tiger habitats in India. The Russian forest is blocked out by this graph. But basically, there are a lot of opportunities for recovering species like tigers. So when a country like US, worries about losing grizzly bears and the big creatures, in a sense, I'm going to give a contrasting argument that even with population densities exceeding 400 human beings per square kilometers, you can bring back big creatures like tigers. So the question is that generally the answer is there room for tigers? No. But I think there is room there for tigers. If there is room for tigers, as other parts of the world, Brazil, Africa, Latin America race down the up the developmental pathway, they will get here. So if you can solve these types of problems in countries like India with the kind of problems I'm talking about, it has a huge relevance in the sense of what will happen in East Africa or South Africa or Brazil maybe 20, 30 years down the line. So in some sense, this is a real world experiment. Just to provide some comparative statistics, roughly 60% of the people live off the land in India, agriculture, some sort of animal husbandry and dependency, versus 3 or 4% of the human population in US. The size is 1/3 of US, the population is 4 times larger. And the energy, biomass, structural timber, a lot of it comes from the land. So all this means there is tremendous pressure on the land. Superimposed on that, we have an economy that kind of grows, when it's sluggish, grows at 5% per year. When it races, it grows at 8% per year. Amidst all these pressures, today natural areas with intact forests, not necessarily wildlife, are about 10% of the land. Designated protected areas are 3% of the land. And de facto, effectively protected wildlife reserves are 1% of the land. So we don't have a lot of elbow room for experiments or daydreaming or romantic ideas of coexistence. We need to make sure these creatures survive under these pretty stark circumstances. So, often solutions that are very glibly promoted just don't work in this context. This is a picture that shows the forest cover of India maybe 2,000 years ago. Then you look at it on the right top, it's the present state of forest cover. And this is the landscape that I primarily work in, the Western Ghats of Karnataka state. This is about 40,000 square kilometers of forest. The deep greens are the protected areas. The rest is multiple use forest under pressure. And in this area, there are 12 million people, along with roughly 300, 400 tigers, and about 2,000, 3,000 elephants, and 12 million people. So, it's managing the whole thing. What do you do? How do you save species in this kind of a circumstance. This is a single protected area of 1,200 square kilometers, and all the red dots are some of the human settlements. So the strategy, the country's plan, in a sense that the pioneers of conservation in the 60s chose a very species-centered strategy. You pick big charismatic species which have wide popular appeal, because otherwise people won't even think of conservation, and use them. And top predators are a good model for that because they require prey, and so big predators like tigers, leopards, Asiatic wild dogs, elephants have even cultural and iconic value. So picking these species, you basically, it's a biodiversity conservation agenda. But if you say biodiversity and throw the Shannon-Wiener index, people will go to sleep. So you need these icons to basically capture large chunks of land and protect it from the kind of pressures I talked about. So this landscape of about 30,000 square kilometers does have all these, like about 4,000 elephants and gaur. No, he doesn't take steroids or anything. It's just bamboo, grass, the largest of the wild cattle, probably the largest population in Asia anywhere in this landscape. Major prey species of the tiger like sambar, axis deer, sloth bears, which is a termite-eating bear which is very unique to endemic to India, and very rare endangered species like the lion-tailed macaque. Only about 1,000 animals or so exist in this strip of forest. Great pied hornbills. So when we say tiger conservation, I mean all this. So people often think these guys are too obsessed with tigers, and it's not. It's all about all this and human sustainability. All the major rivers that irrigate southern India originate in these mountains. Everything starts from there and then flows eastwards. So there are many threats, and the one commonly recognized one is the threat from the increased affluence in China, with everybody wanting to emulate what emperors did in the past, that is consume wildlife parts. So that's a huge pressure. And that's a supply chain that ends up in China but starts in a village with a village trapper putting a trap for a tiger. The even bigger pressure on wildlife comes from hunting, illegal hunting of wildlife by villagers. This is not killing tigers, it's just simply shooting a deer and sharing it with your neighbors or selling it in the local market. So these are the kinds of direct drivers of pressures. Then the large rural population, when we talk of 300 plus people per square kilometers and a large land dependent population, a lot of grazing pressure on tiger habitats and wildlife habitats, fires to promote grazing. The other thing is the thing that's often touted as the solution, which is the minor forest products, collecting minor forest products, body shop and all the story behind that. Now this is the biggest disaster because these products were taken at very low volumes. Today they are being consumed and sold in global markets. This is a leaf, Diospyros leaf, that is used for rolling native cigarettes, a native version of the cigarettes. And the market is so big in India of poor people who smoke it that trees are being cut to harvest it. The sustainability has gone out of the window a long time ago. This is a Garcinia, which was used traditionally in this landscape for making a few curries at home. It's a wild Garcinia. Today there's a drug that's made which reduces obesity, and there are a lot of obese people in this country and other countries. So this has again become a completely one-way traffic of killing the resource itself. So this whole solution that looks right for Latin America, that instead of converting a rainforest to a ranch, you harvest Brazil nuts or whatever, becomes a meaningless solution in a context like India where there are 1.2 billion people, there's a big export industry, and there's a shrinking resource base. On top of it, the modern sector, the growth of the economy, which is not a conspiracy. People want better life, they want aluminum, they want electricity, so I'm not saying it's a corporate conspiracy. But these pressures are ripping apart some of these pristine areas. This is an iron ore mine that actually was in the habitat that I showed in the previous picture, an open cast mine that some of the WCS interventions, our partners fought a 10-year legal battle in the Supreme Court to shut this down. The new green energy has become another fad because it's subsidized, it's driven by tax holidays, and provides incredible opportunities for individual corruption among politicians and bureaucrats. So run-of-the-mill streams, completely uneconomical, almost totally useless for meaningful energy production. They are proliferating and penetrating some of the most remote areas in this area. Same thing with wind power. Tax holidays, huge corruption, and each one of those turbines takes a 45-meter wide road to build and install, and individual politicians own turbines. So, so the threats come in so many forms, rural dependencies, and people choose the threats they don't like and ignore the ones that you are politically comfortable with. But all these are threats. We are putting together a national highway system like the US did in the 50s, which is a great idea. We do need a national highway system, but there is no thinking, there is no planning, and some of these massive multi-lane highways are cutting through some of our last remaining protected areas with consequences like this. So again, advocacy, litigation, there are solutions, but it's a situation where you can't say we don't need a highway system, but we also need to think a little more how we put it into this context where 3% of the area is left. Why do you need to put them through that 3%? Tourism, potentially a very powerful tool to expand tiger habitats and perhaps support conservation. Again, not properly managed, you can barely see the tiger. It's kind of turned into a complete farce, and it's actually alienated poor people because it becomes like tigers are for rich people to come and see in the parks. We are just denied access to the forest, but these guys come, and so the hotel industry makes money, none of it percolates to the community. So there are all these complex issues, and one of the things was that we had a forestry service which was pretty good at protection, had a very limited mandate, but over time it's become a very powerful central bureaucracy, and there's huge amount of money coming into conservation now because India is a rich country, reasonably rich country now, and this money is going into hands of people, and a lot of them are there because the money is there. And it's leading to manipulation of some of these tiger habitats, creating water resources, not based on science, just because you want to spend the money, and there are benefits to that. So it looks pretty hopeless, right? Okay. Now the fascination for tigers and for these animals is fairly deeply rooted in the polytheistic Hindu religion, which is kind of the only surviving polytheistic religion. The Greek, the Egyptians, the Mesopotamian, they all died out. This one survives. So one central thing is that we are a part of nature rather than it was all designed for us, which is a kind of a core idea. So animals are there in iconography, in religion, in culture. So the fascination for the tiger is pretty deep. The current tourist can trace his origin to these ancient gods, the tiger idols, the tiger festivals. So what it provides you is a platform for doing modern conservation. It is not a substitute for rational modern conservation, but it provides a context that's very different. When you go to Wyoming and tell a rancher that you need this space for wolves, he says, no, it's my space. Wolves have no right to exist. The same thing will happen with jaguars and a Brazilian rancher. But in India, the idea that you can have space for nature, other creatures need space, is accepted. So it has enormous potential to build a modern conservation movement. It's a big, despite all the negatives, it provides a positive platform on which you can build modern conservation. Of course, sentiment alone doesn't do conservation, and oftentimes unreasoned passion takes you down crazy paths rather than solving conservation problems. So it has to be science driven. So, as Norm described, I was an engineering student, and in 1965, there was a large format Life magazine article by one of the greatest wildlife biologists, George Schaller, that said, "My year with tigers." He just spent 1.5 years with tigers in Kanha Reserve with a binocular and a camera. There was no other tools. I had read every tiger book by hunters, naturalists, perhaps 200 tiger books, and George's article of 1.5 pages, it was like a cataract operation. Suddenly I saw how using science and reason and logic and questioning, you could answer questions. There was more in that 1.5 page article than in all the hunter's tales that I had read. So it was an eye opener, and I said, I hate this damn engineering, this is what I should be doing. This is what I want to do. And I was 19 or 20. It took me 18 more years to kind of steer my career through all sorts of pathways to get really professionally trained. In the end, of course, when I was graduating from University of Florida, George came and people introduced me as this slightly older student there, 38 years old, but he's pretty good and gets good grades and has a lot. So George talked to me and said, oh, like all Indians, you will settle in America, right? I said, no, George, I want to go back to India and write a better tiger book than yours. Then he said, come and see me in New York. So that's how I ended up being hired by WCS 25 years ago. It's a wonderful institution that just functions like a venture capital firm. They give you a little money and say, go do what you want. If you collapse, you collapse. But if you succeed, they back you. So it's worked out. This is George and me measuring a tiger kill in 1991. So the program grew from a small tiger project to a fairly substantial intervention now, which involves monitoring tigers and prey over 4,000 square kilometers with a staff of about 100, and some of the most aggressive litigation in India, some relocation. I'll talk about the content, but it started as a small project and kind of took time, because I see a lot of young people, they're in a real hurry to do conservation. And I'm telling you, conservation is not a 100-meter dash. You can't be a Usain Bolt and do conservation. It is a marathon. The first glimmer of results will come after 25 years. If you are prepared for that, get into conservation. So my theme was kind of building on George Schaller's work, understanding the scientifically understanding the relationship between prey and large predators. And this is some early pictures. My guru, Mel Sundquist, probably the best guru you can have if you are a carnivore biologist and a radio tracker. He is here, collecting scats and kills and doing pretty much without modern technology. The next step was to actually put collars and understand the biology of tigers. At that point in time, Mel Sundquist and his colleagues in the University of Florida and Smithsonian had done a major tiger study in Nepal. But India, which had the most tigers, was a blank slate. We knew nothing about Indian tigers. So we had to put collars and track them. But they're not as easy to catch as mice. How do you catch this damn thing, So what we did, oftentimes I see this dichotomy between native indigenous wisdom and modern science. I think you need to blend the two, and that's what we did. We used a technique used by the kings to hunt tigers. It involves putting a bait out, live bait, the tigers kill the bait, and then what you do is you put a little radio collar on the bait. So the tiger is there and you know it's taken this buffalo calf. You go and erect this cloth fence, around the tiger. The tiger is not aware it's being done. It's had its 30 kilos of meat and it's sleeping. And you know because you are doing tracking that it's there next to the kill. You surround it with a corral, then you sit on a tree, leave an opening. The trained elephants, this is the elephant capture team, Sundquist, myself, and the trackers and 2 elephants. That's a lovely thing to have trained elephants. So you go and slowly push the tiger without making it run, and the tiger comes right under you and you dart it at that distance. And it's so slick, the animal doesn't know it's been darted. So it worked beautifully. We caught a few tigers, put collars on them and tracked them, and the basic understanding, this is I think one of the things in modern ecology is it's all become about complexity and multi-species and community, but I think ecological studies, understanding what a single species does, what it needs are is really critical. It gives you insights, and that's kind of gone out of fashion, but I really learnt a lot. This was Sundari, a tigress that I tracked for 6 years. I spent the whole week with her, went home to my wife and Kriti only on the weekends, so my wife was naturally very jealous. Sundari was like a competitor. Now, Sundari had a home range of 15 square kilometers, 20 square kilometers. tigresses in Russia have 600 square kilometer home ranges. All of Nagarhole Park would hold one tigress, breeding tigress, if it was in Russia. But we had, with 20 square kilometer home ranges, we could pack it with 20 or 30 tigresses. So this is where the science becomes really critical. The knowledge of how much space they need, how many kills, and the communication system. It was fantastic. These 60 animals, how do they even keep in touch? They don't live in groups like lions. It was scent spraying, chemical communication of the highest sophistication. No Twitter, no email, no phone number, no letters. They kept in contact, met, avoided each other, and maintained a society at low density, just spraying urine and scent on a tree and roaring occasionally. So as I understood the biology of the tiger, this whole doomsday scenario started unfolding in the 90s. Tigers will go extinct, and so my interest shifted from, okay, I know the biology, but this is not going to be very helpful to deal with conservation. I really need to know about numbers, and the numbers issue was about how do you count something so elusive. And the Indian Forest Service, there's a massive bureaucracy which had invented a method of doing total counts of tigers just by looking at tracks. It didn't work, but it survived for 25 years. So I set out trying to find alternative methods. How do you measure success? So, sampling animals, that's when, I got exposed to some of the original thinkers in this field. David Anderson, who pioneered line transect sampling. Jim Nichols was one of the greatest experts in capture-recapture. So I got exposed to these ideas of, our biology is different from laboratory biology. Roy Chapman can see every beetle in every jar of flour that he studies, but half my tigers are invisible, a third are invisible in the next sample. So this whole issue of imperfect detection and how you address it using very, very rigorous methods came up. Of course, I started putting cameras, and you get all these cute creatures, but they're not tigers. But they're rare species. You get a lot of data. Piggy bear, bear riding piggyback on her mom, elephants inspecting my camera trap. I don't like this picture. Actually, dogs chasing a sambar through the camera trapping system, a leopard smiling for the photo, a black leopard which is completely useless for capture-recapture because you can't ID them. But we did get individuals. We gave them labels, gave them names, not names, really individual numbers. And one of the breakthroughs to me was to get to know Jim Nichols and people at USGS Patuxent in the early 90s, when this stuff was beginning to just percolate into the wildlife profession. That detectability was a big issue. You need to address it, and these were really pioneers. Jim is kind of always hidden like he is. He's imperfectly detectable behind Byron Williams' hand. But basically the idea of using capture-recapture and using natural markings instead of tagging these animals occurred, and I started testing a hypothesis that George Schaller had proposed, that tigers take 10% of the available prey, and did a study across India which really showed the strong correlation between prey densities measured very rigorously using distance sampling, tiger densities measured using capture-recapture, and actually explained why tigers' range has shrunk. It has nothing to do with the Chinese eating tigers. It's about villagers hunting the tiger's prey. The range contraction is driven because there's no food. All these areas are as good as the spots on the right side, but because the prey has been hunted out. So the science gives you key insights, and that's really important, and there's no substitute for that. So this was the bigger problem than just killing of tigers. So as I unfolded the science, because I came from a conservation background, for me it was equally important that this patch of land with tigers had to be saved, this large landscape. So one of the things I did was to involve local youth from the small towns in actually collecting data, and not like a picnic, not like these Earthwatch guys who pay a lot of money and have a picnic. It was really serious distance sampling, ugly conditions of stay, but they came back and they became some of the stalwarts in the area. They are all in their 40s now and they are very socially powerful people. So we form a network and they make the political calls, and through them, and also working with the lower rungs of the enforcement machinery. They have a thankless job in India keeping out poachers. So we built a network of people both within the government system and outside the government system. I keep growing older, but these young guys remain young. And out of this came a bunch of stalwarts, like the Girish, who is on the top left, is a coffee planter, but he spends 90% of his time on conservation. He can pick up the phone and talk to a minister and threaten him. So this social power that you bring is really critical. Otherwise, you can't do conservation. As a scientist, you can do very little. But involvement of these people, like Muthana, who is a journalist, a human rights journalist, who was very critical of me when I began, came and joined my team because his empathy with the tribal people was incredible, and he is now a core member of my team. And dealing with these guys on a direct basis, religious guys, because they have huge influence on this system. I do some of this mooching at the top, meeting ministers and kind of channeling federal money into some of these projects, conservation projects, reaching out to the local society in regional languages, using the media effectively, because the press can be very bad or very good depending on how you manage them, and also writing books, etc., in the local language. If you write in English in India, you reach a certain audience that is in cities. They will have a great time reading your book, but they will do nothing for conservation. So reaching to a broader audience is really critical. And campaigns, sometimes you have to go on the overdrive, extreme, like you have to shut a mine. It doesn't happen with slideshows. You have to file court cases, you have to build an agitation, litigation. Fortunately, we have an open society, so you can go to court and shut down projects, and so we use that very effectively. So all that I have talked so far is about just keeping that 3% intact. Is it safe? No. See, I showed you in the beginning, I showed a slide of settlements and people living even within that 3%. So what do? A lot of people have this illusion that 60 tigers, 1,000 elephants and 6,000 people can all live in 600 square kilometers. Unfortunately, it's not possible. It's ecologically impossible to have that mixture depending on body size, diet and whatever, unless they are all software engineers living in one multi-storied building in the middle. So one of the key things to me that came out of the science was that these settlements caused problems, conflicts, and they were unsolvable. It looks very idyllic, but you have rice paddy growing, elephants go and trample the crops, elephants get shot, tigers go and kill cows. Tigers love to eat cows, they are dumb and fat. So tigers get poisoned. This man, collecting honey in a harmonious way, as many people would want, had his scalp ripped off by a bear. I had to put him in my jeep, take him to the hospital, and he survived. He lost an eye. Now this is not romantic. This idea that you coexist with these big fierce creatures all packed in, it's not romantic at all. So how do you deal with it? And one of the things that we started against much criticism from human rights activists, etc., was to persuade people to relocate, kick the government or pressurize the government. Let me be polite, this is being videotaped. So pressurize the government to make sure that they deliver. They deliver the money on time and they do the work on time. So it's actually being an aggressive supporter of the people, confronting the bureaucracy and making it deliver relocation in a way that is beneficial to people. And it becomes a voluntary process, like 10 people benefit, it's like a magnet, other people come. So this has been one of the most difficult things, and Kriti was involved in doing some of the studies of how they were better off before or after. So we built some projects which are spectacularly successful. People say they are better off, they are doing better by every metric, and we've even tried a privately funded project where people were moved out. And then particularly if they come from the lower social strata in India, India is a very stratified, caste-ridden society. If they are disempowered people, you have to handhold them for 10 years after they move to make sure they are not bullied or their land is not taken away by the more powerful groups. So we are involved with their healthcare, involved with their schooling, and but the results are really dramatic. I started negotiating with 6 families which had 500 buffaloes, and it took 10 years to convince them to move. They moved out, the habitat recovered, and today there are gaur grazing in the same site, and they are also happy somewhere. So in the end, this could be just a fairy tale. How do you know it's working? Is it meaningful? I'm not Mother Teresa. I didn't do this for being good to people. Is it working for tigers? Again, science is critical. We have a massive monitoring program. This is the line transect effort. Like we walk 5,000 kilometers of transects. We detect some 3,000 ungulate species, do very, very rigorous ungulate surveys using distance sampling. It involves a massive amount of field work because large mammal studies are very, very labor intensive. This is a survey design that, proper survey design. The value of design and thinking about surveys is critical. A lot of people say, I have 2 cameras, I want to survey snow leopards in 200,000 square kilometers. You can't do it. But we have now measures actually of densities of ungulates, 10, 20-year data sets. And this is where I think the collaboration also is really important, that many of you, we would like to collaborate on some of this thing. It's not just, we have lots of good data. And the same thing with tigers. Camera trapping data now going back to 1991, only the latter bit is shown here. And today the database has more than 700 individual tigers. I mean, it's not big compared to, say, a marked gull data or a seal data, but for something like a big carnivore, having a database of 700 identified individuals with densities measured across the years accurately. Each row is an individual tiger, the capture history of an individual tiger. So all these guys are piled up there. And we have tracks of individual animals, when they were born, when they died, where they moved, what happened to them. I don't have time to go in, but it's also aiding to forensics. We are able to trace poached tigers to prosecute poachers by linking skins in their position to living tigers or camera trap tigers. We have documented dispersal of 300 kilometers, 200 kilometers, long distance dispersals using camera trap data. This is a fragmented landscape with 12 million people, lot of ruptures, but still tigers are able to move through this. So, a lot of data shows room for optimism. High mortality rates, but the populations are surviving, sustaining, doing really well. And WCS is basically a non-profit. We would like to share this knowledge. So we develop new things. We are working with Intel Corporation to develop a complete infrared camera. Even the flash is infrared. It takes pictures. This picture is taken at pitch black. There's no light. So the whole issue of flashlight and theft and vandalism go away. We worked with Lex Hebe, a mathematician, to develop a pattern matching software. So when you have thousands of comparisons to be done of stripes, it happens instantly. We worked with Jim Nichols and Andy Royal to develop a distribution survey method using the Nichols-Royal approach that seems to give a very good index to abundance just based on sign surveys of large patches. And the spatially explicit capture-recapture modeling. Again, my basic idea is to catch people like Jim Clark or Gelfand and Jim Nichols and nag them, saying, I have this problem, you solve it, because I can't solve it. And it works. You nag them enough, give them good beer, they solve these problems. And then put that good stuff out in public domain and where it's accessible. That's really sharing knowledge in various forms. And the government of India, which is a slow beast, is even beginning to wake up. They're showing some interest now in absorbing some of these methods. So we have workshops and in government institutions. There's again Jim. And also WCS has a global tiger program that reaches to every Asian country. So we share all this work. We are replicating it in Thailand right now. So to me, the future of the tiger, often seen as a dead tiger or a tiger in captivity, is not what I see as it. And I don't see the growth and development in India as enemies of conservation. It poses problems, but it also takes people off the land. The transition from an ag-based economy to a service manufacturing economy frees up land, frees up certain kinds of pressures. Cultural behaviors change. Hunting is replaced as a social entertainment by watching cricket matches. So all this is hugely helpful to conservation. So I don't see development as an enemy of conservation. If you play your cards right, you can have that economic growth and you can have wildlife. And tiger is a very fecund species. Tigers breed like rats actually, you know. The females replaces herself 15 times in a lifespan, and they have dispersal abilities, they produce well. And this is a picture I took in 1994, and I think it captures the idea that I truly believe that we can at some point in time have 50,000 tigers in the world. Thank you.
We have time for some questions. Maybe we can get the lights back on. I turned them off, but I don't know how to turn them on. I think hit the plus button. Yes.
Okay, you got it.
Some questions? So you were telling me you've got 12 million people living in that part of that protected area, or the protected area?
No, in the whole landscape.
In the whole landscape, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Few thousand in the protected areas.
And your hope is not to move all of those people, just a small
No, I wish I could, but I can't. But you know, then you have to, this rewilding idea that's taking over America. We can't do that.
Okay.
What's practical is actually the high economic growth, the high labor wages, which have multiplied by 30 times, is actually attracting people. People want hospitals, they want access to schools, they want their kids to go to, you know, get a bus and go to school. And it's really like a magnet. Development is like a magnet. There's large-scale movement of labor across India. Today, a carpenter in Bangalore is coming from Rajasthan. The same thing at a local scale is happening. If you can just leverage that, use that smartly, you can save a lot of wild places.
So you mentioned rewilding. I don't know if many of you are familiar with that. There's an idea that the future of the world is, first of all, to get the population down to like a billion or two people, but then to take all those people and put them into little tiny pockets of urban areas and leave the rest to be wild. There's another concept which is sort of the opposite, that says that we will develop mechanisms so that humans and somewhat natural habitats can live side by side. I don't think you accept that either, because you want to have more of a separation. Is that right?
No, I would, you know, there was a big debate when Caring for the Earth, the document put together by WWF, UNEP, and World Resource Institute came out in '92. John Robinson, my teacher and my current boss, rebutted it in Conservation Biology in an article called Limits to Caring. And I think what we need is certain parts of the landscape locked up for species like this. A large part of the landscape, probably a lot of biodiversity, and so low intensity uses like farming could coexist. And some other parts that need to be very intensively farmed, and you have to have factories and perhaps power generation. So I think you need to manage. John called it carving up tomorrow's world. And I think that's the direction I'm saying. I'm talking about tigers, and I'm saying tigers need this. But obviously, everywhere can't be.
But your hope is for that 3%.
No, my hope is 10%.
10%.
But right now,
all right, that's good.
3% is,
yes.
you know, that's all you have. So you can't compromise the 3% and then say I'll have 10% after 25 years.
No, sure. That's okay. We got the 10% we'll be watching for.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
You talked about the importance of religion and presumably also vegetarianism in India to base conservation on, and I think about the conflict between tigers and cattle, and in the United States we also have this issue where we have a large group of people who hunt ungulates, and any predator that eats ungulates is viewed as competition, rather not that scientifically based is up to debate. So I guess I wonder if you were mentioning India as a role model for Brazil and some other developing countries. So I guess I wondered, India compare them with other countries that have more cattle for food and or more hunting of ungulates?
Yeah, so before you answer that question, I did something really bad in that you're supposed to ask your questions using the microphones because it's being taped. But I'm going to try really hard to channel you and re-say that question for the people at home. And that is to comment on the unique characters of India with regard to religion or respect for animals and with regard to vegetarianism as it relates to taking some of your models and transferring them to other places like Brazil.
Yeah, I think, you know, I kind of compressed in that talk. If you look at India, there are 3 Indias. There is a large part of India with the most forest, which is in the northeast, and eastern central part of India, like the states of Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, then it goes. This is almost like Southeast Asia. None of this works there. Everything bigger than bread basket has been, bread box has been killed and eaten. You have beautiful forests and they are empty forests. So that's like Southeast Asia. I don't think it's really religion. I've been to Laos, which is Buddhist, but everything has been eaten, fried, cooked, and you go to the market, you see little bulbul being sold, dipped in oil and fried. So there's one India there. The other vegetarian tolerant bit, there are 2 states in the west, Rajasthan and Gujarat mainly, where people, you do see large herds of ungulates which are not killed because they are sacred or they are not eaten, but they are degrading the land. You have the BLM overgrazing kind of situation in some of those places. So it's not necessarily good for biodiversity in that sense, but there's tolerance. Then the rest of India, the southern India and some of the other states, they are kind of in between. That's the situation I'm talking about, where the reverence, the culture gives you a handle to work on, but you know, in my state, 30 people get killed by elephants every year. And that's a lot of people. And in any other country, that would have been like one biker gets eaten in California, it's like big national news. This is 30 human beings getting killed by elephants in one state. So the tolerance levels are helpful. I'm not saying that alone is a solution. Now, when you talk about Brazil, obviously all that doesn't exist. So it's more like the Western American model. I was comparing Brazil or whatever was in the sense as these economies grew, people would get off the land. And some of these massively subsidized crony capitalist kind of schemes, why forest is being cleared or why do you need these big projects, I think those will go away with proper development. This is what I'm saying, the densities that you have are artificially low. They will get to the size they are in India, and that's when you will have a real problem. I'm not saying we have all the solutions. I'm saying some of these will have relevance when Brazil has 300 people per square kilometer.
We have time for one more question. I think this gentleman over here.
Yeah.
Check. Thank you very much, Dr. Karanth. I've got 2 allied questions, both to do with the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve. What happens in terms of the conservation you do when you have your tigers actually move into other parts of the Biosphere Reserve across states, say into Kerala and Tamil Nadu? The second deals with what happens with something, you spoke about people being moved out of their areas and relocation, but what happens when the wildlife comes to existing places? For example, the gaur population has increased tremendously in a place like Kannur, and people were killed in the town limits itself recently. Yeah. What then happens in those particular cases, and how do you do this? Thank you.
The movement across states, tigers are good dispersers. Like those 2 examples I showed, we have found number of instances of animals moving across and dispersing. See, in a sense, these conflicts that we are facing now are a price we are paying for the success of conservation. If you know, you don't have conflict between tigers and people in large swaths of India where you would expect it to be there, where people are in the middle of the forest, in Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Orissa, Arunachal, you don't hear of conflict because the tigers are finished. I mean, they are in such low numbers. What we have are these big cats have very high reproduction rates, and elephants have wide-ranging movements, and they eat, they're attracted to crops. I think the solutions based on relocation are preventive rather than dealing with the conflict, but that doesn't mean the conflict stops. You still have to deal with conflict when it occurs. And trenching has been found, if there is no corruption, to be a very effective way when you trench off agricultural land from forest, a real deep 3-meter trench keeps elephants out. Leopards actually have increased enormously. One of my students did a PhD on leopards, finding 4 leopards per 100 square kilometers in complete farmland in Maharashtra and in Karnataka. They are thriving. They are eating dogs. 90% of their diet is unowned feral dogs that are plentiful. In Bangalore city, there are 75,000 dogs, occasionally eating poor people's children, biting a lot of working people, but they are protected because of some humane laws. So they provide a stable food base for leopards. I mean, it's a weird scene. You can do conservation in so many ways.
That's an amazing story. Ullas, it is our tradition for our distinguished lecturer to get a small gift. Okay. And we often use the work of an artist named Marjorie Pearson. Oh, okay. And she does works of natural scenery, usually coastal environments that are being threatened. Okay. This picture we have for you here is taken in Bald Head Island, which is one of North Carolina's barrier islands. It's a picture of a marsh with literally dozens and dozens of ibis, beautiful white majestic birds, flying and eating and nesting. They say the ibis is sometimes referred to as the bravest of the brave because they're the last ones to seek shelter in a hurricane, and the first out. And we thought that was appropriate for the bravery that you show in standing up for the tiger, and we wish you your 10%. Congratulations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.